I'm Gilbert Shelton. I grew up in Houston, and I moved to Austin in 1958 when I was a sophomore in college and started going to UT and contributing cartoons to the student humor magazine, the Texas Ranger. And this, in fact, turned into my life's work. It's being a cartoonist. It's not exactly work, but let me go on. The student humor magazine was edited by Frank Stack when I first came to school, and he was an artist and very talented one. The student magazine was sort of art and literary oriented at the time, and I did what I thought were funny cartoons. I was supposed to be studying history, but my real education was humor magazine, and I've never done anything else since. There was a bunch of humor magazine editors all across the nation, and we would exchange copies of our humor magazines. Terry Gilliam had one in Los Angeles. He went to Occidental College, and his magazine was called Fang. And there was other magazines at Harvard and Yale and University of Missouri. Mort Walker had been editor of the humor magazine at the University of Missouri, and that shaped his life too. He was a cartoonist all his life. While we were students at UT, Jack Jackson created what was often referred to as the first underground comic. It was called God Knows. I think maybe Jackson had graduated by this time. He had a job at the state capitol, and he got the printers at the state capitol to print his underground comic book, God Knows, secretly at night, one page at a time. And so this comic, which was later called by the student newspaper the Nadir of Bad Taste, was actually printed in the Capitol, in the basement at the Capitol building. This is often called the first underground comic, but actually I had published earlier a collection of The Adventures of Jesus by Frank Stack. I just used his initials because by this time Frank had a job as teaching art at the University of Missouri in Columbia, and so I used his initials FS. So he made up a pseudonym to go with those initials, Fulbert Sturgeon, so that people would think it was me. And he used that pseudonym for a long time, until finally he took back his real name. But The Adventures of Jesus is earlier than God Knows, and part of the inspiration for it. And that's really the first underground comic. And if you happen to have a copy of this, I saw it appraised in the Underground Comics Price Guide at $10,000. I don't even have a copy myself, I don't think. There was another cartoonist from Texas that worked for the East Village Other in New York and was an early underground cartoonist. That was Bill Beckman, and he did a comic strip called Captain High in the East Village Other. That was pretty funny, and he could have claimed to be the first underground cartoonist too. When I was first graduated from the University of Texas, I went off to New York and worked for a while as an assistant editor of an automotive magazine, a couple of automotive magazines called Speed and Custom Rodder. And this was a real job. I think it was the last one I ever had. And I would sneak my own drawings into these automobile magazines, pretending that it was mail from readers sending in their drawings. And so I had a good time. And in my spare time, I developed a cartoon character called Wart Hog, which was a parody of Superman. Everyone seemed to like Wart Hog, so I kept doing it for years and years. In fact, I still do it from time to time. Joe Brown and Tony Bell and I did a long series of Wart Hog. We ended up with about 600 pages of Wart Hog, which I think someone's gonna publish as an anthology here one of these days. Later, I developed characters known as the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. This was in the 67 in Austin. I was the art director at the Vulcan Gas Company doing posters, and one night there was a double feature of one film was the Marx Brothers and the other film was the Three Stooges, so I was inspired by that, and I thought I could do a film. I did the film with Joe Brown as the Texas hippie that marches on the Capitol, and I did the first Freak Brothers strip as an advertisement for this 5-minute film, and everybody liked the comic strip better than the film, and Bill Brammer lost the only copy of the film, but that was how the Freak Brothers were launched. I was inspired by Robert Crumb's Zap comics, so I made my own little underground comic called Feds and Heads, and this had the first of the Freak Brothers adventures. And when I had 50 pages, it was collected into a book, a comic book, the Freak Brothers, and that just sold like hotcakes. That took off. What happened was that 4 guys from Austin that had moved to San Francisco, that was myself and Jack Jackson and Fred Todd and Dave Moriarty, we pooled our money and bought a printing press in San Francisco, and we were going to print rock posters, and we did a few, but we didn't really know how to work the printing press at the time, and the posters really looked horrible. But at the same time, we discovered that comic books were easier to print and didn't have to look good like posters. So we started printing Freak Brothers comics, and in the end, we sold millions and millions of them, and really went on a run with Freak Brothers comics. I lived in San Francisco for about 15 years and then eventually got bored with that and decided to go traveling. So my wife Laura and I moved first to Barcelona and then to Paris, France. The comic book scene in France, I don't mind saying I'm a cartoonist. Back in the States, when people ask me, when my old high school friends would ask me what was I doing, I would have to say I'm in the publishing business. They weren't impressed if I told them I was a cartoonist. But now they are. Back here in Austin, my fame has outgrew me.